Yes, this is Auntie. I found Auntie a few years back. I fell in love with her immediately. The pose. I mean, I imagined that she was some kind of muse, or that she would have been involved in the creative process of a sitting or draftsmanship with an artist in Montparnasse. It could have been Braque, or it could have been Modigliani or something. She's totally articulated, as you can see. And there's lots of emotion on her, these fabulous textiles that are worn with time. Almost like a good luck symbol, really. I mean, she accompanied me to my first artisanal défilé in London. She loved it there, she loved it.
John, the show in January went viral beyond what we've ever seen before. Why do you think it resonated and keeps resonating so much with people?
I was somewhat taken aback myself. I mean, I've had a couple of fashion moments, but perhaps at that time not recorded the way they are today. And we've kind of looked into it to see, what happened, how did this happen? And I think the resounding feeling is one of emotion, that we created an emotion that perhaps people were hankering to see in clothes, with our muses and the music and the venue and the weather. I mean, it was a full moon. All those things, I think, added up to creating this emotion that people seem to want to feel.
Do you think that's something that is sort of missing, has been missing?
Even myself, for some time, when I first came to Maison Margiela, I wanted to put the focus back on the clothes, so that, and a little bit of theatre can go a long, long way. I almost felt like I was denying a bit of myself, how important the backdrop can be to the dream, or challenging people to dream. So I'm quite happy to show in our very clinical white box, and then the pandemic hit us all. And we had to find new ways of communicating, so I kind of threw myself into film world, whether it was Olivia Down or Nick Knight, creating narrative stories, reinforcing our beliefs, what we believed in Maison Margiela, and kind of learned a lot. And then inevitably we got through that very difficult period. And I sensed that people wanted to return to the physicality, but I didn't want to go right back into the white box again, because I thought, wow, it's been nearly 2 years and one's learned so much. How can I carry on with this way of communicating, embracing the different cultures involved, photography, digital mixing, film work, theatre, show, all those things. And that was the Cinema Inferno collection, which embraced all those things. It was such a powerful tool for communicating, and even after, and was very seductive, a very seductive way of working, and the images, and we could run with it.
Within this production, a lot of, especially young audiences, seem to feel that they were experiencing an old JG show. There were elements of the kind of grand theatrical orchestrations that you used to put on. Why do you think that resonates so much with people?
I think young and slightly older as well. There was some people that had reached out to me after and had said, oh, we grew up with, I was 8 and I was like watching your fashion shows. I grew up with them, and actually it's because of your shows that I forged my way into the fashion world, which was really nice to hear. Also, they'd say, but we never saw it again. We thought that was just something from a bygone time. So to see it today, it was like they were super excited. And then the young, the appeal was enormous. You saw they were mimicking or being inspired by the way Leon walked, or shoving pillows up their skirts and things, and running and expressing themselves on TikTok. It was like something that I'd never seen before. Quite amazing. I mean, I've always loved that. You can reach out to the kids and inspire them, and you'll see someone who doesn't have the budget for, but is incredibly creative, and they'll turn their trench coat back to front, and it makes them feel great, and makes me feel great to see that as well.
Infusing the artisanal show with those elements, the more sort of JG elements, was that a conscious or an unconscious move on your part, do you think?
I mean, I can't deny JG. I am John Galliano, and I know some people perhaps don't quite understand the work we're doing here, but we've got to remember I had this incredible opportunity to spend time with Martin Margiela, the founding father of this house, where it was so inspiring. I mean, you can't imagine. But he said, take what you will from the DNA, John, protect yourself, and make this house your own. Gentlemanly, but so smart as well. I mean, how could anyone, myself, dare to think what Martin would be doing today? Because he's an artist today. He's expressing himself on canvases. So really no one would really know what. Having had that chat with him and delved into the archives, and some of it I felt very comfortable with, because as young designers we were experiencing, researching, whatever, understanding, deconstructing clothes to learn how to better construct them. It was kind of 80s, so I felt quite comfortable with that, and kind of understood a little bit the psychology. So I realized that things had to move on. I'd had a little experience where perhaps, from a personal point of view, I'd pushed myself into a corner where the bias cuts became so famous, that's all people talked about, or the bar jacket, my other day job. So I didn't want that to happen either, because that can be very restricting. The thing has to flow, it has to move on. So, of course, I'm not going to deny JG. I had the blessing of Martin. And psychologically, I felt I was doing the right thing for the house.
So when people try to create this contrast between Margiela and Galliano, what do you say to those people?
Well, everything I'm doing here is for Maison Margiela, and it's been here nearly 10 years now. So it's a culmination of all the little theses that we've had. We've often shared our pyramid where we talk about different things that might inspire a collection, and that's become almost, the blood that courses through our veins, our creative veins, that belongs to Maison Margiela. I mean, I can look at some of those things on that pyramid, and for sure they're not areas that I've dared to experiment with or be inspired by, or one is able to be inspired by those things in a completely different way, being here. My love of the work in progress, the toile, the hidden beauty, the emotions involved, the unfinished symphony, if you like. All that were things that kind of resonated with where I felt creatively I wanted to go, which is very Margiela.
Indeed. Over the years, being at Margiela, I think when you arrived here, it was like a kind of breath. You took a deep breath, and it felt like everything was more future-driven. You were talking about technology, and you were talking about the digital age, and you continue to do so. And gradually, you started infusing it with elements of your early London collections that you were referencing, or the bias cut, or the siren dresses, or these various things. Has designing all these collections for Margiela since you came back to fashion been a cathartic process for you?
Yes, you can say that it has. I think when I came to Margiela, it was after I took some time out, I was in recovery, I came back and there was a whole new world happening, and surrounding myself with young adults as well that kind of opened my eyes, and understanding how they were communicating. All that was really new for me, and I embraced it. It was electrifying, as much as it was electrifying for the young adults in the team to hear and see how I worked. It kind of worked both ways. It was really a good time. And from a point of view of communicating, it was radical. Things like the bias cut and that, I kind of intentionally put the brakes on that because I know what's involved, especially if you're going to produce it, and it's quite something to be able to produce. We did introduce it eventually through the menswear. I think it was the first artisanal menswear collection, but that was after, a good year of testing, hanging the fabric to stretch, working with industry backwards and forwards, sharing little secrets, tricks of the trade, how we could actually produce a very languid, loose suit for a Margiela boy that hung as beautifully as one of the dresses I used to do at Galliano. But that took some working out until I felt that it was really right to go on the market, and they still exist, and they're still the first things to fly out. Very tall basketball players often favor them.
I remember the first one. It's like electric blue, mercurial,
yeah,
incredible.
Satin back crepe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we went on to refine and polish and work it so that you could actually produce it. Short runs, because it's still very demanding. It has a life of its own, that fabric, yeah. But then that pushed me to do it, to move away from the satin back crepes, and I was cutting tweed on the bias because I felt it was a bit more day, and then I got really excited about that because I hadn't done that before. So the idea of doing day dresses on the bias in washed tweeds, you kind of find a way, don't you, that kind of makes sense. So that was really exciting, to push that bias even further, and with fabrics that perhaps I hadn't dared to try.
All of this this decade leads up to this year, this kind of annus mirabilis that you are having right now, which is incredible. The show in January, the documentary, and the Met Ball, all are very kind of, it feels very momentous. What kind of thoughts went into doing the documentary?
I wanted to share the story. I wanted to share the story with young people, to make them a little bit more aware of the industry. That was really the reason why I agreed to do that documentary. And then I thought I would never have to talk about it again. And just here we go. I continued to atone, of course. Really, I wanted to share that story with the young kids. Really, that's what I wanted to do there.
How did you feel about it when it was done?
There was no escape. It was like a confession. I couldn't flinch or move or anything. So it was quite confrontational to be filmed like that. I now realize that it was a really good thing to do. A really good thing to do. And even some have attributed it to me feeling a little bit more relaxed in the things that I'm doing, which could be true.
And it was very nice in the kind of consecutive order that it happened, that kind of led into the Met Ball, where you then had like I think you had the most traction of any designer at the Met Ball, and when they measure it, like it's completely amazing. Two of those looks especially were very special to you, I think. Zendaya and Kim Kardashian. How did they come about, those two looks?
Well, Kim had wanted to work for me, as I can say this because she said it as though she'd been stalking me for about 5 years, and had become very friendly with Alexi, and we'd met 2 or 3 times in LA, and I kind of liked her. But it's always nice to form a relationship, and you know, so whenever there's a special project, I'd love for us to do something together. And sometimes I couldn't. And anyway, this was the ideal moment, the Met, so she'd reached out. And I think we were in LA already, so we started the whole creative process. She put the time in. We did fittings in LA, she came here. And then linking this dress that was actually like silver metal that was tooled to look like dentelle, like lace. But it was all put together, linked together like haute joaillerie over the corseted shape. And then to just throw it off kilter a bit, this kind of washed and fucked up cardigan. Became very famous, that cardigan. So that was Kim, and then we wanted to, you know, leave some, just to sense her, because she's gorgeous, she's really gorgeous. But we wanted to sense the skin a little bit more, so we lightened up the makeup, and the idea of her going that ash blonde, but we had to start doing it 2 months before because just felt it looked more real to have the roots growing through and then do tonic rinses, and just more sensuous. Kim, and she looked gorgeous in the pictures. I thought she looked really gorgeous. Zendaya was a different story, which was really cute. Again, someone that I'd been, you know, admired for some time, and the opportunity came along, and so we worked together with Law, and we did quick sketches. She sent a mood board, and a lot of the stuff on the mood board was stuff that I'd created in the past. So just trying to understand what it was, because there were so many directions, and it was very flattering to have a large percentage of it will be myself. So then I started sketching and inking, and just no colors or not too much detail, just to try and understand which direction they wanted to go in. They wanted drama. So they'd come to the right place, for sure. Yeah, so then we started to work on that silhouette, that dress, which I felt was kind of very her. And then the second dress that she wore for her second, I think she opened the red carpet and closed the red carpet. Historically, that has never happened. The power of Zendaya. She actually, it was a dress that it was my first haute couture at Givenchy, and she'd become obsessed with that dress. So anyway, we did the fittings with her on the Maison Margiela dress, and then she asked if I would leave the room for 5 minutes, and it was a bit weird, isn't it? Like, and I saw Law and her running around the back with this huge bundle, and next door she put on this dress and sailed through, and I was just like, oh my God, where did you get that from? And she knew the whole history behind it. You know, she then showed me the corset, passage number, worn by Veronica Webb, and she'd bought it. She owned the piece. I got quite emotional. I thought, wow, this is someone that's, you know, very, very special. So that night I said, I want to write. I was inspired, so I wrote a little treatment for her, which subsequently she said she really enjoyed it, because normally she has to work it all out. So we created this Duchess, the Duchess of Lexington and 77th. I know it was like the nearest metro stop to the Metropolitan, if you like, and that she had fallen asleep on the metro for 100 years and then awoke and suddenly, the doors would slide open and shut her. And through distant memories, she felt that she was at her country house. Anyway, that little story enabled her to do those fantastic shapes that kind of looked effortless. She became a perfect Galliano muse, so fab.
In her Baldini brushstroke dress.
Yes, that was, I started to notice that when we were working through the pictures, sometimes you do see things they call it my homework here. At the end of fittings, I take a pile of photocopies and that and just see it through the lens almost to see how that's going to look. Because these women, they have to look fabulous, but fabulous in 360 and in an uncontrolled environment. It's not like a shoot, where you can, there are people shooting them from every angle. So we would do that whole 360 fitting around and around, up the stairs, down the stairs, what do we see, which is up the stairs. It was intense, but I wasn't going to let them down. Yeah.
I remember one of the first times we spoke when you were at Margiela, you told me you wanted to create the coolest, most cutting-edge couture house in Paris.
That's true, and that's still our mission. Just going back to the point you made just a second ago, that the Galliano-ism, for sure I've done bias cuts before, and for sure I've had forays into corsets, but that, inspired by body morphology and the pictures of Brassai, creating that body shape was something quite original. Yes, I've done corsetry before, but not that shape. And yes, I've done bias cutting, but I've never fitted bias cut on a preordained shape. So for me, that was like freshness and newness and challenging. I knew how to work the other way. So it was actually new territory for me as well, to fit on the more voluptuous shapes. And kind of at the same time, I was playing around with Kim as well. So you can imagine I was totally exhilarated and excited by it. Yes, the familiar, but in a new way. And I think that's what's interesting as well. It kind of, from distance, looked familiar, but on closer inspection, you could see that the biasing had been really pushed. The idea of a seamless dress had been pushed to infinity now. The lace dress with the godets and the papillon encrusted on her derriere, to do godets where there was no seams, where each flower was encrusted, was quite a feat of engineering. And then that aquarelle or retrograding way of watercoloring the clothes, the idea that some of them would start off as a linear sketch and then as they work down the body become more 3D and you'd recognize the dress at the end. So that kind of like diffusion, like dégradé, not just of color, but dégradé of fabric, dégradé of mediums, dégradé of embroideries, a whole dégradé. It was really fun and new for me to do.
The amount of illusion is amazing when you go close to any of your work, and especially this collection from January. It's really astonishing how much people don't actually see because they're not supposed to. It's all this kind of beautiful mirage that unfolds.
Yeah, and I'd heard that from people, and people say, "Oh, it's all over so fast that we're kind of in a trance and enjoying it and trying to understand what it is well." So we decided to have like an open day a couple of weeks after, almost like a post-mortem, to invite people and students and people in-house to come and see the clothes close up, to enjoy the research, all the research that has gone into not just the production of the collection, but the actual production of the défilé. So we shared all that from, my research into dolls, porcelain dolls, and different periods, different finishings, all the photographs of Brassai, the moods, the characters, and And then a lot of people hadn't realized that a lot of the menswear inspired pieces, the caban, the duffel, the trench, the Ulster coat, that actually they weren't it was an illusion as well. So what we wanted to do was to create the illusion of menswear fabrics and the illusion that it was in that fabric, like a heavy soldier, military inspired coat was as light as a feather. You could roll them up like that. So we chose the right fabric and we printed on it to look like a military serge. Then to give it the texture, we worked in a millefeuille way. So to give it the texture of those heavy coats, it would be double organza, lint, some chiffon, couture techniques, even if it was to look like an old fucked up military coat. But the thing was as light as a feather. The sense of history or emotion was the final layer that was actually printed or moon-bathed, inspired by the lighting of Brassai as well. That was printed on the tool, which was the final layer. So it was true and real couture technique that kind of looked familiar from a distance, but when you rolled those things up in your hand, you could see that it was just like an impossibility. It was like a feather. Yeah. And so the challenge for that was fantastic, and all the different processes, which we tried to show as well through our book. So a herringbone, we had to find the right way to print it on the right surface that was super light. So it was printed on crêpe de chine, normally associated with light summer dresses for girls, Then the ravaging of the moon, how it could have bleached away certain parts of a coat that was left, in your wardrobe and it had no door, whatever, time. So there we went into a dark room and we tried to recreate the light of Brassai with torches and directional lighting on the toile. That then became the beginning of an artwork but everything had to raccord, like a grand beaded dress that one would do for couture. It was using all those techniques in a newer way, maybe.
Did you have a lot of orders?
We did get orders, a lot for us, because we're not totally set up, and unfortunately we did have to turn some down or come to an agreement that we could produce them faire à mesure, like when we could. But we did.
I think a lot of people, when they watch a show like the one in January, will think, in this age of fashion where everything has become so sort of commercially driven and there's all this fireworks around the shows and not so much focus on the actual clothes and so on, how does John Galliano manage to keep that level of creative integrity, be so uncompromising, and maintain all your values? You never let your values down. Like, how hard is that today in fashion?
Well, I think values are values. One keeps those, but we should also remember that some of those commercial, I won't say constraints, but the things that you have to respect are more driven with the ready-to-wear lines. What we saw in January was couture, was artisanal. And here, it works as an inspiration. It's the top of the pyramid, as we've often talked about. It's the parfum that will inspire the other collections that are ready to wear. And yes, they do take time. I mean, that was like the first, I think it was a year since the previous couture, because it takes time to develop a line, that intensity of work and creation and with your team and the hours of fitting. You want to create beautiful things, they take time. They take time. Really a lot of time went into the body modification. The corsetry took you can't rush that. You just can't. That was a lot of engineering and a lot of fitting and a lot of support work underneath, things that you may not even have seen. The ritual of dressing, it was like super inspiring before we could actually build the collection. In fact, I would say that I think longer was spent on the undergarments than the actual collection itself, which was full on. But we had to get the foundations right first, and then we could build on our body shape. Yeah, it takes time. It takes time to develop it. I mean, I think it's worth it because it does inspire and it helps to move fashion on a little bit. Volumes, techniques, finishings that can inspire the industry. Yeah, for ready to wear.
But you must have a very good way of staying stubborn somehow. You know, you must be.
I'm full of hope. I believe in what I'm doing. Start making compromises. It's never the same, is it? It's never the same. I've maybe been able to explain better how some of these things that we do in couture can influence, inspire, educate the ready-to-wear. And now seeing results that it does, it's easier.
Yeah. The justification of it, yeah. But I mean, look at the reactions.
The understanding of it as well sometimes.
Yeah.
People aren't aware that some of these dresses can take up to 18 toiles. You know, it's refining and polishing and refining, and the clock's ticking and we're still refining, and I would still carry on refining it, you know. Each look, each fabric, each teaches you something completely new. You know, a simple bias cut velvet skirt. Well, you try making a skirt in velvet on the bias when you're having to deal with the pile, how you press it, how you brush the hair out, you know, for it to look seamless. It takes a lot of the great talents we have in the atelier, really, who are pressing, steaming, and with a toothbrush, pulling each hair, each fibre out of the velour so that the seams are invisible. And it's just like...
mind-blowing.
Yeah, that kind of detail is you can only do that. Fitting Leon's pants over a corset. Maybe ever seen a pair of trousers like that? It went on and on and on and on. I mean, he was putting the time in. He was here being corset trained. And so, you know, whenever he came in, we tried the trousers on. It was like polished and refined. The pleats were open. They would drop. They were closed. They would drop. There was yeah, time.
I think that does make you very different to many other parts of the industry. Do you keep up with what's going on in the industry?
In what sense?
Do you still have a sort of curiosity to go and like look at another show on your phone or?
Yeah, I've done that, and I love shopping.
You love shopping?
Yes, I love discovering new designers, young designers, new designers in new places with traditional houses. Yeah, of course, it's all part of my world, isn't it? It's important to keep plugged in. Yeah.
How do you shop? Do you go to stores or you do online?
I love walking the streets and going into boutiques and talking to the managers, and yeah. I love it. I love that, yeah.
Can you still get inspired by fashion when you are creating all the time, or do you have to look elsewhere for it? Do you have, for inspiration, I mean, art and culture?
Oh, I look everywhere. Film, music. We all do. All creatives are open to a vast stimuli of inspiration. Not just fashion history, or part of the narrative as well. We were talking about the narrative earlier with the muses. And it's quite known here that I'll introduce certain pieces of music to help create that mood, not just for the muse, but for the team that's working. Different pieces of music can change the emotion in the way you're draping or cutting or producing a frill a staccato, something more violent, something more aggressive, less aggressive, softer, Vivaldi. Pieces of music that you still need, you need for your soul, but don't always intrude in that creative process, which is often silent anyway. My muses talk to me through body language. I mean, we talk after Thomas and Valentine, we have a good old banter. During the fittings, we never talk. We never talk. I'm just looking and checking and fitting and doing. Music's important to create the vision, the feeling, the whatever. You're really, really cold. You're standing by the Seine. It's been the greatest party of your life, and you're trawling back. Your shoes are killing you. You've kicked them off. You're by the Seine. It's really cold. You're so cold. You're so cold. You're so cold. Until we kind of get the shape that could inspire a way of cutting. I think we called it gestural cutting. There's a very strong wind blowing on you now, and they give, just little direction like that is translated in body language, which we then record, which then can be translated as a way to cut the drape in a jacket or a trouser or, the senses, all senses.
And it's not just music, it's also scent, right? You layer all these fragrances.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. No, we take it,
all of it.
Yeah, it's important, the scent. It's that first olfactory introduction into the line, almost. Certain scents that I felt were important, or even the scent of gin on a woman's breath can bring things, mixed with some kind of tangerine pigment lip. That the senses all helps build up that character. Or what does it smell like? Those young boys, the scent, the grand classic scent that their fathers might have worn, when they're under that bridge. It all builds up the story. Which they lap up, the muses. I mean, they love it. And then you see what they do. I mean, they go the extra 1,000 kilometers and more,
When you are such a storyteller and your way of creating really exceeds the boundaries of fashion so much, do you find that you have an easier time relating to people outside of fashion if you were to mirror yourself in someone? Who do you consider your peers creatively?
People that share the same values, work ethic, commitment, those kind of people.
No names.
They're friends, and sometimes I like to keep that private.
Indeed. What would you like for people who wear the Maison Margiela that you have evolved and created and innovated, what would you like for it to mean to them today?
The design and make is incredibly considered. The fit, all those things have been taken into it. How it feels to wear Margiela today. There's a huge amount of work that went into that in my early days, where perhaps some things were quite generic, understandably so. It hadn't had a leader for some time. So the actual, what it feels to wear a Margiela dress, what it feels to wear a Margiela jacket, I hope that you could feel it and that it's, considered design.
Your creations here are very loaded with values as well. I think, that you've always, from the beginning, talked about nonconformity and, being different, individuality and all of these things. And I think it is very much, you feel that within the garments.
I embrace all those things and believe in them, absolutely, and encourage my team to be that. If I can share some experiences with them, I do. I positively encourage them to express themselves through clothing. You can wear what you want here.
There's a lot of soul in what you create here. There's soul in the garments.
Because I think it's created with a soul and something that's authentic.
Yeah.
It's nice to imbue a garment with soul, isn't it? I mean, it really is more than, it's just more, isn't it? I think when you're inspired by, I don't know, an old man's coat and he's worn it for 50 years and it's imbued with his character and how he's worn it, and just to take that as a lead, that could inspire a way of cutting that coat, you know, defects as well that would ordinarily be ironed out and picture perfect. Well, I don't want to lose that emotion in the clothes. I think that brings, there's so chic about that, I think. Like, you know, an ancestral hand-me-down that comes with that history, or that someone's worn, and, you know, I think there's something quite sensual about that too. I like that. I like that. It's like a scent. It's like a scent. You can't put your finger on it, but it's that little thing that's slightly off that you might want to enhance, or it inspires something else, and it's just that little thing that you know is going on your body that's can be incredibly empowering.
How content do you feel today? It's a good question after after the first half year of this year that you've been through.
Very content, of course. I've never relied on my work, or I've never relied on anything to to find happiness. I realise that is in my head. Because when you do, I think sometimes you can be disappointed. But I know that by putting on just a piece of music, I can change my mood really quickly. I mean, nanoseconds. Yeah, of course I'm content, yeah.